This past year saw the release of a wide variety of amazing games, ranging from the juggernaut AAA releases of long-anticipated titles such as God of War Ragnarok and Elden Ring, to surprise hits like Cult of the Lamb or A Plague Tale Requiem. And that's not even the tip of the iceberg. There are far more games below the surface that, for the sake of time, I can't possibly list out here. With the year coming to a close, I should be dedicating all of my time trying to play all the games I might have missed out on during the year to better determine, or more fairly determine, which game stands at the top of my list as my game of the year and what makes up the top 10. So why on earth am I playing The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt again? Despite having a litany of games I need to get to for end of the year roundups, I'm replaying a game that was released almost 8 years ago, which makes me feel ancient to say. Of course, its recent next-gen patch may seem like the clear answer here, though quite honestly that was just the excuse I used to go back to The Witcher 3. I've been wanting to replay it for a while now, as it is one of my favorite games of all time. Which brings us to the topic in this video, where I pose the question, why do we replay our favorite games? Now, to be clear, everything I say here is only based on personal perspective and through my own lens, and isn't necessarily based on fact, for how could it be? There is no right answer to why we replay games. There are many answers that vary from person to person. All I've done here was come up with a handful that come from my own personal reasoning. Before we get started though, folks, I just wanted to say, hey, thanks for checking out this video. It is a brave new frontier for me, and I appreciate every little bit of support and feedback you've got for me. And I would very much appreciate you sharing this video to every single person you know on the planet. Assuming, of course, you end up liking what you see here. And of course, the best way to prove that would be by hitting the like button and pressing the subscribe button. But without further ado, let's get into the reasons why I think we replay our favorite video games. It was the middle of July, 1 month before I began my freshman year of high school. I found myself in a GameStop, given the opportunity to pick out any game of my choosing. And that game was Batman Arkham Knight. Then I 100%ed it in a week, and then I was able to exchange it for what would become one of my favorite video games of all time, The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. Over the years, I've started many second playthroughs, but now, nearly 8 years later, here I am, fully committed to playing through it all over again. As odd as it may sound, playing The Witcher 3, an undoubtedly adult game, brings me back to a simpler time, before I truly had to begin adulting. Back before I had to worry about money and rent, and when I was a lot more carefree in the world. Whenever I'm out hunting for monsters with 2 swords at my back, all my worries of today just seem to fade away, even if it's just for a short time. While I did start this topic talking about how I'm currently deep into a replay of The Witcher 3, this can still be said about the numerous other games I replayed as I grew into the person you see before you today. Skyrim, Fallout New Vegas, the Arkham trilogy, the original Saints Row games are all video games I've replayed numerous times whenever I just needed something reliable and fun to go back to. Back when I first played those games, I wasn't in a position to just go around and buy the next new hot game releasing, so oftentimes, these were the games I spent countless hours in growing up. So naturally, I spent far more time than I probably should have in each of them, and when there was nothing else to do, I'd play it all over again. When you had nothing to play, you played the ever-living crap out of the games you did have, a struggle I'm sure many of us faced growing up, before we had a job and could afford to buy new games. Of course, when we did get jobs, our time to play new games got cut down because of newfound responsibilities and other adult garbage we all deal with today, or you soon will have to deal with yourself. Spending hundreds of hours with these games in my early years of gaming helped solidify them as some of my all-time favorites. And that is the power of nostalgia. Playing any one of those games blankets that sweet nostalgia juice all over me. That sounded a little bit grosser than I intended. I apologize for that. It's because of these fond memories of comfort that I personally find myself replaying some of my favorite games in hopes to find some similar sense of that comfort when the world around me is far more complicated than it used to be. It's funny to think that a video game could bring a person that kind of comfort, but that's what nostalgia can do, bring people comfort. It just so happens that most of my early memories of joy come from playing video games that wind up becoming some of my favorites. And that's not a sad thing. I just wanted to clear that up real quick because I'm sure it could be misconstrued that way, saying that my only early memories of joys from a video game, it's not sad. I'm sure as I was talking about the games I grew up playing for endless amounts of hours, there was a game from your younger years that popped up in your head that you also remember fondly and get similar feelings from when you play it. And honestly, that's quite a beautiful thing that video games can give people. Most of the games I have a desire to replay are games I played at a much younger age, arguably a much younger age than the intended audience for certain games. Because of this, it's safe to assume that my brain wasn't always filled with nearly as much knowledge and intellect as there is now. And it's because of that, another reason I get the urge to replay my favorite games is because I've learned a lot since the last time I've played them. Things I used to think were simple answers of black and white or good and bad have become more morally gray as I've matured. Or for a more direct example that doesn't involve me spoiling the end of a very new popular show on HBO, let's look at Skyrim. Where I once thought the Imperials were the clear-cut good guys of the Civil War, I now feel less certain of this when I look at things from the sides of the Stormcloaks, wanting to push back against people they consider to be invading their homelands. Being a young preteen during my first playthrough, these weren't things I noticed the first time I played Skyrim, but have during subsequent playthroughs as I got older.
I fight for my people, impoverished to pay the debts of an empire too weak to rule them, yet brands them criminals for wanting to rule themselves.
Also, it was kind of nice that there would always be a new re-release every 3 or so years, so the game was slightly prettier every time I went back to it. That was pretty convenient. I've also noticed that the way I approach games has changed over the years. When I was much younger, my only goal was to see those credits roll, and that would result in me trying to play through a game as quickly as I could. Not like speedrun fast, of course, I was only like 10 at the time. Barreling to the finish line meant I'd miss out on a lot of the game's side content, which I now learned can be the highlights of some games and in a lot of ways serve as the icing on the cake. Unless you don't like icing, then it's just more stuff to love on top of a game I already adored. As you may be able to tell, today I look at games as much more than just a form of entertainment or a way to pass the time. I look at them as they are, a form of art. When I replay an older game now, I'm much more aware of things like its art style, its music, and its story. It pains me to admit it, but growing up, in my real young days, I was the kind of kid that would skip cutscenes just to get back to beating up the bad guys. It's shameful, I know. These new perspectives I've gained over the years of personal growth more often than not make it so that the next time I replay these games, I end up picking up on new pieces of subtext, details I've never noticed, or completely unexplored areas in some cases, that end up making me appreciate the game in a new way. This is definitely helped when you consider that many of my favorite games are chock full of player choice. Therefore, no new playthrough is ever the same as the last. With that new perspective, I end up exploring these games in new ways, which only adds more depth to them and further solidifies them as a game I truly love. It's with the further exploration of these games that make me feel confident that they are in fact good games, and that I wasn't simply blinded by the aforementioned nostalgia, tricked into believing they were. The kind of game that, even after your third or fourth playthrough, nearly a decade after its initial release, you can look back at it and say, yeah, this game has the stuff, and it's held up pretty well. All of which culminates in our last point for today's video. Sure, you can play through a game in its entirety, then declare it as one of your favorite games, but to me, I don't think you'll be able to know for sure until you've played through it again without being blinded by the hype and anticipation of playing through a new experience. Yes, when I rolled credits on God of War Ragnarok, I declared it as one of my favorite games of all time. But as soon as those words formed in my head, I felt something was wrong with them. I stopped to consider the numerous games I already considered to be my all-time favorites, and couldn't quite determine where Ragnarok would fit on that list. And because of that, I had to reconsider that statement and ask myself, is God of War Ragnarok one of my all-time favorites? Or am I still just basking in its hype as a long-awaited sequel with a fantastic story? It was at that moment when I realized that I wanted to replay it right then and there to make sure I truly did love this game, and wasn't just blinded by hype and the new shiny game syndrome. all of which is just a long roundabout way to lead us here. It occurred to me that my favorite games are all games I've played more than once, and it's because it's in those replays where you find out just how much a game can shine. If I were to sit down and list the games I consider my all-time favorites, the most recent one comes from 2018 with Red Dead Redemption 2. And even that game, I'm not entirely sure if it truly belongs there, because all I really remember is how gosh darn good that story was. I mean, if Rockstar would ever re-release this game on current gen consoles, that would be a perfect excuse to replay it, then finally know for sure if that belongs there. But I'm getting off track. The point is, these are games that I have had time to sit with and put many hours into from multiple playthroughs with new perspectives over the years. And it's knowing that the games I find so much comfort in have aged well that solidifies them as some of my all-time favorites. So I guess as it turns out, I don't replay my favorite games. The games worth replaying become my favorite games. Whew! That was a lot of words. I hope most of it made sense and was easy to follow. As I said at the top, this is my first endeavor into the territory of video essays, and honestly, it's a bit daunting, but of course, we can't grow without challenging ourselves every now and then. But yeah, what are some of the games you find yourself replaying, and why do you replay them? I'd love to know in the comments below, and as a bonus, that helps with the algorithm to boost this video's views, which is something that you can also help out with by leaving a like if you did like this video. My plans are to release a video essay much like this one once a month, and in between I'll have more on the cuff, likely shorter form videos and so on. 2023 is the year I actually try to grow this channel. So if you want to hop on board this train, why not hit subscribe and ring the bell, or whatever it is that happens on this site. I shockingly know very little about the YouTube algorithm, but we'll figure it out as we go, won't we? So thanks for watching, everyone. I hope to be back here not too long from now. Stay safe and play some video games.